"You're fired." Lucien Devereaux never looked up from the contract beneath his hand. The young woman standing across from his massive walnut desk went pale, but she knew better than to argue with the most feared mafia boss in Chicago. She gathered her notebook, whispered a stiff thank you, and disappeared behind the closing doors, becoming the 12th female executive secretary Lucien had dismissed in 5 years. To everyone at Devereaux Holdings, the pattern had become predictable. To Lucien, it was simply proof that rules existed for a reason. Never negotiate from emotion, never trust twice after betrayal, and never allow a woman close enough to his private office to become a liability again. So when Elias Ward, his chief of security, placed the next resume before him, and Lucien saw the name Maren Holloway, his expression hardened. 32, nearly 10 years of executive administrative experience. Exceptional references. No prestigious family connections, no glamorous photograph, no exaggerated accomplishments. Just competence written plainly across 2 pages. Then he saw the one detail that should have ended the interview immediately. Female. Send her in. The board members seated nearby exchanged glances. The doors opened, and Maren stepped inside wearing a simple navy suit tailored around her plus-size figure, practical black heels, and an expression so calm it almost irritated him. She did not shrink beneath his stare. She did not flirt. She did not perform confidence. "Good morning, Mr. Devereaux." Lucien gestured toward the chair. "You know I don't hire women for this position." Maren sat carefully. "I read the policy." "Yet you came. The agency scheduled the interview. I gave them my word I would attend." His eyes narrowed. "Even knowing I'd probably reject you?" Her answer came without defensiveness. Professionalism matters most when keeping your word gives you nothing in return. Something shifted in the room. Lucien opened her resume again. Her references claimed she possessed an extraordinary memory. Fine. He would expose the exaggeration quickly. He read 30 appointments allowed investor meetings, security briefings, private dinners, legal consultations, cities, names, priorities, deliberately scrambling every detail. Repeat them. Maren inhaled once and began. She recalled all 30, then reorganized them chronologically, identified 2 scheduling conflicts, and pointed out that one conference had been arranged outside reasonable business hours for the European participants. An executive checked his laptop. She was right. Lucien's expression barely changed, but before he could respond, the conference doors burst open. A senior director rushed inside. "Mr. Devereaux, the Hawthorne acquisition files are gone." The room froze. The $500 million negotiation began in 42 minutes. The encrypted folder had vanished, and the backup was corrupted. Executives reached for phones as controlled panic swallowed the room. Everyone moved except Maren. "When was the last full coordination review?" she asked. Heads turned toward the woman who technically had not even been hired. 3 days earlier, someone answered. Maren had attended as an observer for another department. She closed her eyes. Then she started naming documents, purchase agreements, environmental reports, insurance certificates, property valuations, tax summaries, risk assessments. She remembered which department had prepared each one, who had approved the revisions, and where duplicate departmental copies should still exist. People stopped panicking and started listening. Within minutes, assistants were retrieving files from legal, finance, compliance, and operations. One document after another returned to the negotiation package until the impossible became undeniable. The woman Lucien had already decided he would never hire had just saved the biggest deal of the year. 42 minutes became 12. 12 became 5. Finally, the restored package landed on Lucien's desk. Maren quietly straightened the papers. The meeting can still start on time. No celebration, no request for credit. Lucien stared at her, then slowly opened the folder containing his executive hiring policies. Everyone knew what was inside. He removed the signed page, declaring that no woman would serve as his executive secretary again. 5 years of suspicion had been turned into ink on that paper. Lucien held Maren's gaze and tore it cleanly in half. The sound seemed impossibly loud. "You start Monday." Maren's eyes widened for the first time. Around them, 20 executives remained silent. They believed they had just watched Chicago's most feared mafia boss make an exception. They were wrong. Lucien Devereaux had not merely broken a rule that morning. He had opened the door to the one woman who would eventually force him to question why he had built so many walls in the first place. 3 weeks after Lucien Devereaux tore his own hiring policy in half, the executive floor of Devereaux Holdings began experiencing something no one there knew how to describe: peace. For years, Lucien's office had operated like a command center under permanent siege. Phones rang before sunrise, meetings collided, executives waited outside, locked conference rooms, and minor scheduling mistakes often became problems before lunch. Maren Holloway never announced that she intended to change any of it. She simply arrived 20 minutes before everyone else and began noticing what other people overlooked. By the time Lucien stepped from his private elevator each morning, every room had been confirmed, every security clearance checked, every travel itinerary reviewed, and every document he would need was waiting in the correct order. At first, Lucien treated the improvement as temporary. Competence impressed him. Consistency earned his attention. Maren seemed determined to offer both. One Monday, she entered his office at 11:58 and placed a wrapped turkey sandwich beside his laptop. "I didn't order lunch." "I know." He kept signing papers. "Then why is it here?" "Because you skipped breakfast, drank 3 coffees, and you have 7 meetings after your Zurich call." Lucien finally looked up. "Are you monitoring my diet now?" "No. I'm protecting everyone who has to negotiate with you when you're hungry." For 1 second, the room went silent. Then Maren turned toward the door as though she had said nothing unusual. "The coffee will stay hot for about 10 minutes. Lucien frowned at the sandwich. 5 minutes later, half of it was gone. The next afternoon, she intercepted him in the hallway, while he was walking toward an acquisition meeting with 3 executives. "You have a dentist appointment. Cancel it. I already rescheduled it twice." "Then reschedule it again." Maren handed him a folder without blinking. "The next opening is in 3 months. I'm busy." "So are root canals." One executive looked down to hide a smile. Nobody spoke to Lucien Devereaux that way, and remained employed. Yet Maren was not challenging his authority. She was doing something far more unsettling. She was refusing to let his authority become an excuse for neglecting himself. Lucien stared at her, exhaled, then changed direction toward the private elevator. Behind him, one executive whispered, "Did she just win?" The answer became clearer with every passing week. Maren caught duplicate meetings before they reached his calendar, returned unsigned contracts before legal deadlines expired, corrected hotel reservations before overseas trips, and quietly reorganized visitor screening with Elias Ward until security incidents dropped sharply. She never mentioned these victories. Lucien usually discovered them because disasters simply stopped happening. Maren did not make herself indispensable by demanding space in his life. She became indispensable by removing chaos from it. Even the smallest details began betraying how closely she paid attention. Before a video call with investors in Singapore, she stepped into his office and said, "Your tie is inside out." Lucien looked down. She was right. Without smiling, Maren offered him a spare already matched to his charcoal suit. "You keep spare ties? You keep forgetting them." He almost smiled. Almost. Late one evening, Lucien remained behind after the building had emptied, surrounded by quarterly reports and a silence that felt strangely different. Through the glass wall, he saw Maren at her desk preparing the next morning's agenda. She was not waiting for praise. She did not know he was watching. She was simply making tomorrow easier before going home. For a man who had spent years believing control was the only reliable form of safety, the realization landed with uncomfortable weight. His office no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt predictable, reliable, almost peaceful, and that frightened him, because somewhere between forgotten lunches, impossible schedules, and a dentist appointment he would have cancelled, Lucien had begun, depending on the one person he had sworn he would never hire. Dependence, however, was not the same as trust, and Lucien Devereaux understood that distinction better than most men. One rainy evening, nearly 2 months after Maren Holloway entered his office, Elias Ward placed a sealed security report on Lucien's desk. "We finished another background review. Lucien glanced at the name on the folder. Maren Holloway. You've checked her 3 times. I check everyone 3 times. Elias remained standing. No hidden debt. No unexplained deposits. No communication with competitors. No questionable relationships with suppliers. Nothing. Lucien leaned back. No one is that clean. Elias studied him carefully. Maybe she is. The words pulled Lucien toward a memory he had spent 6 years burying. He rose and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago, where rain blurred the city lights into streaks of silver. 6 years earlier, Devereaux Holdings had been preparing the largest expansion in its history. Acquisition targets, banking agreements, private valuations, negotiation strategies, everything had passed through the executive office. Then a woman Lucien trusted sold the information to a competitor. Banks withdrew. Partners vanished. A deal worth billions collapsed before Lucien understood he had been betrayed. The next secretary leaked private schedules. Another accepted expensive gifts from suppliers. Another used confidential information to gain influence. Eventually, Lucien stopped seeing individual failures. He saw a pattern, and fear gave that pattern a respectable name: risk management. It was easier to ban trust than risk surviving betrayal again. A quiet knock interrupted the memory. Maren entered carrying the next morning's board briefing. "I'll leave this here." She placed it on his desk and walked out without glancing at the security report bearing her own name. Elias watched her leave. She wasn't even curious. Lucien's jaw tightened. That's what concerns me. Yet the following morning gave him another reason to question himself. An investment bank mistakenly emailed confidential valuation documents to Maren before the files had been properly encrypted. She could have opened everything. Instead, she immediately contacted legal compliance, verified every recipient, requested deletion confirmation, documented the mistake, and informed Lucien only after the exposure had been contained. He studied her report. "You could have read it." "Yes, you didn't. It wasn't addressed to me." Lucien searched her face. "Most people would have looked." Maren shrugged gently. "Curiosity isn't part of my job description." Days later, another test arrived without Lucien arranging it. A major supplier delivered an expensive designer handbag addressed personally to Maren, accompanied by a note thanking her for making access to the chairman easier. She carried the unopened package directly into Lucien's office. "This needs to go to compliance." Lucien examined the box. "You don't want to see what's inside?" "No. It could be worth thousands." "That's exactly why I shouldn't accept it." Elias arrived and collected the package, but after the door closed, Lucien stopped Maren before she could leave. "Why?" She turned. "Why what? Why refuse something when nobody would ever know?" Maren looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Then she answered softly, "Because I would know." 6 simple words followed Lucien for the rest of the day. They followed him through negotiations, through dinner, through the silent drive home. He had spent years believing integrity existed only when consequences enforced it. Maren behaved as though character mattered most when no one was watching. Several nights later, Lucien left his office and reached the elevator before realizing he had forgotten to lock the confidential cabinet behind his desk. His hand moved toward the key in his pocket. Then he looked back through the glass. Maren sat alone, organizing tomorrow's agenda. The cabinet was only yards away. She never glanced toward it. Lucien stood there for several seconds before slowly lowering his hand. The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside without returning to lock the cabinet. It was a tiny decision no one else would have noticed. But for a man who had built his empire around control, it was enormous. For the first time since betrayal nearly destroyed everything he had built, Lucien chose to trust someone before fear could tell him not to. What he did not yet understand was that the more openly he trusted Maren, the more everyone around them would begin asking why a woman they had underestimated from the moment she arrived had become the one person closest to Chicago's most guarded man. Lucien's trust should have made Maren's job easier. Instead, it gave everyone else something new to whisper about. By the beginning of her 3rd month at Devereaux Holdings, executives who once wondered how quickly she would be fired were asking a different question. Why had she become so important? The answers grew uglier as they traveled through the building. Some claimed Lucien kept Maren because he pitied her. Others said her plus-size appearance made her harmless around a powerful man, accustomed to beautiful women seeking his attention. The cruelest suggestion was repeated in elevators and break rooms. Lucien trusted her because no one could possibly consider her a romantic distraction. Maren heard enough to understand the rest. She had spent years learning how quickly people could reduce a capable woman to the shape of her body. So she did what she always did. She worked. One afternoon, she entered the employee lounge, and conversation stopped instantly. 3 associates stared at their phones. As Maren filled her coffee, someone behind her whispered, "I guess being ordinary has advantages." Soft laughter followed. Her fingers tightened around the cup, but she walked away without answering. Days later, the cruelty became impossible to ignore. Someone anonymously posted edited photographs on the company's internal platform, widening Maren's figure grotesquely and placing her face above an image of a collapsing office chair. One caption read, "Executive support, executive size." 23 employees reacted before human resources removed the posts. Maren arrived the next morning already, knowing something had happened. Conversations died when she approached. People avoided her eyes. Still, at 8 sharp, Lucien's schedule was waiting on his desk. At 10, he noticed what everyone else missed. Her smile was smaller. During their briefing, she rubbed her left wrist 3 times. "You didn't sleep." Maren looked up. "I'm fine. You touch your wrist when you're upset." Surprise crossed her face. She had not realized he noticed such things. "It isn't important." Lucien let her leave without pressing her. Then he called Elias. "Find out." 15 minutes later, printed screenshots covered his desk. Lucien studied every distorted photograph, every joke, every laughing reaction. His face remained perfectly still. Elias knew that expression. Anger was dangerous. Lucien's silence was worse. "Who started it?" "We're tracing the account." Across the executive floor, Serena Ashcroft watched Maren return to work. Elegant, ambitious, and accustomed to commanding attention. Serena had spent years positioning herself as the woman Lucien would eventually trust most. Instead, a quiet secretary had accomplished what Serena never could. She had entered the space around him without demanding it. Rumors had failed to remove her. Humiliation online had failed to break her. Serena's eyes settled on an invitation resting on her desk. The annual Devereaux Foundation Charity Gala, where the city's wealthiest executives, politicians, investors, and philanthropists would gather beneath one roof. A slow smile touched her lips. If Maren could not be made small in private, Serena would make her feel small in front of everyone who mattered. And this time, Lucien would be there to see it. The annual Devereaux Foundation Charity Gala transformed the Grand Ashbourne Hotel into a world Maren Holloway had spent most of her life observing from a distance. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across marble floors, while Chicago's wealthiest business leaders, politicians, philanthropists, and international investors moved through the ballroom in designer gowns and custom tuxedos. Maren had nearly declined her invitation. She owned only one formal dress, a deep emerald gown she had bought years earlier after saving for months, and although it fit her plus-size figure beautifully, standing beside women, dressed by luxury designers, awakened insecurities. She thought she had learned to silence. Still, she reminded herself that she had earned her invitation through work, not appearance. She belonged in that room because of what she had contributed, even if part of her still struggled to believe it. Across the ballroom, Lucien noticed her the moment she entered. He was speaking with donors about a multi-million-dollar education initiative, yet his attention drifted toward Maren more often than he intended. She stood near the edge of the crowd, laughing softly with a junior accountant, unaware that several people had already turned to look at her. Elias appeared beside Lucien. "You've checked where she is 7 times. Lucien lifted his water. "I'm monitoring the room." "Of course." Lucien ignored him, but Serena Ashcroft noticed something Elias had already understood. Lucien was not watching Maren because he distrusted her. He was watching because her presence mattered to him. Serena accepted a glass of red Bordeaux from a passing server and stared across the ballroom. Maren had done nothing Serena understood as competition. She had never flirted with Lucien, never chased influence, never demanded recognition, yet somehow, she possessed the one thing Serena had spent years trying to earn his trust. When Maren stepped toward the refreshment table, Serena moved. The collision was elegant enough to look accidental. One slight turn, one carefully timed step. Then the wine tipped forward. Dark red liquid splashed across Maren's emerald gown, spreading from her chest toward her waist in a stain, impossible to hide. Nearby conversations stopped. Maren gasped and stepped backward. "Oh my goodness," Serena said, reaching for a napkin without any urgency. "How unfortunate." Maren's cheeks burned as dozens of eyes settled on her body. She accepted the napkin and began blotting helplessly at the fabric. "It's all right." She wanted only to disappear into the restroom before the humiliation became entertainment. Serena could have allowed that. Instead, she raised her voice just enough for the surrounding guests to hear. Perhaps executive assistants should remember where they belong. Silence struck harder than laughter. Then someone chuckled nervously. Maren stopped moving. Serena's eyes traveled deliberately over her stained dress. These events can be difficult when someone isn't accustomed to this kind of environment. More guests turned toward them. Maren recognized some of the same executives who had ignored the cruel photographs posted about her days earlier. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody defended her. Years of being judged before she spoke came rushing back, the job interviews where eyes lingered on her body before reaching her resume, the whispered jokes, the compliments that sounded like apologies. Her hand trembled around the napkin. "I'm sorry if I caused any inconvenience," she whispered. She had done nothing wrong, yet experience had taught her that apologizing often ended cruelty faster than defending herself. Serena smiled. That surrender was exactly what she wanted. But Maren did not see the conversation across the ballroom stop. She did not see a donor turn toward Lucien and ask why he had suddenly gone silent. She did not see Elias follow his gaze. Lucien stood motionless, his glass untouched in his hand, looking past hundreds of powerful guests toward one woman, trying to make herself smaller so everyone else could remain comfortable. He saw the wine staining the dress she had probably worried was not elegant enough. He saw Serena's satisfaction. Most of all, he saw Maren apologize for being publicly humiliated. Something cold settled inside him. For months, Maren had quietly protected his company, his reputation, his health, his secrets, and even the parts of himself he refused to protect. Tonight, when she needed someone to protect her dignity, an entire ballroom had chosen silence. Lucien set down his glass. Then Chicago's most feared mafia boss began walking toward her. Lucien did not hurry. Men like him rarely needed to. He crossed the ballroom with the same measured calm he carried into hostile negotiations, and somehow that frightened people more than anger ever could. Conversations faded one by one, as guests realized where Chicago's most feared mafia boss was headed. Serena saw him first. The satisfaction on her face disappeared. Maren was still staring at the ruined emerald fabric when the crowd around her suddenly became silent. She lifted her eyes and found Lucien standing only a few feet away. He looked at the wine spreading across her dress, then at the crumpled napkin trembling between her fingers. Finally, he looked at Serena. "Mr. Devereaux," Serena began quickly. "It was an accident." Lucien said nothing. He removed his black dinner jacket and stepped toward Maren. For one startled second, she thought he was going to ask her to leave. Instead, he gently placed the jacket around her shoulders, drawing the fabric closed until the stain disappeared beneath it. Maren froze. The jacket was warm from his body. Around them, hundreds of people watched a man famous for keeping everyone at a distance protect a woman who had spent the evening trying not to be noticed. Lucien's voice was quiet when he finally spoke. "Did you apologize?" Maren swallowed. "I didn't want to cause a scene." Something tightened behind his eyes. He turned toward Serena. "You spilled wine on her. Accidentally. Then you insulted her." Serena forced a nervous smile. "I was joking. Everyone is making this far more serious than I intended." Lucien's expression did not change. Intent does not erase character. The words traveled farther than shouting could have. Serena's smile vanished. Lucien, surely you understand. I understand perfectly. He looked around at the executives and guests who had watched without intervening. For months, this woman has prevented problems most of you never knew existed. She protected confidential information when she could have exploited it. She refused favors she could have accepted without consequence. She kept this company standing while asking for nothing except the opportunity to do her job. Maren stared at him, unable to speak. Lucien's gaze returned to Serena, and tonight you decided her appearance made her an acceptable target. That isn't what happened. It is exactly what happened. His voice remained controlled. Anyone who humiliates the woman responsible for keeping this company standing is humiliating me. The ballroom became utterly still. Several executives lowered their eyes. Maren felt something inside her give way. Not pain this time, but the exhausting belief that she always had to endure cruelty alone. Lucien continued, addressing everyone now. Devereaux Holdings measures people by competence, integrity, loyalty, and character. Not dress size, not popularity, not whether someone fits another person's definition of beauty. His eyes swept across the room. If anyone here believes otherwise, they are free to reconsider whether they belong in my company. No one laughed now. No one whispered. Lucien turned back to Maren and offered his arm. Walk with me. She hesitated. I don't want to ruin your evening. For the first time, his expression softened. You didn't ruin anything. He glanced at the people surrounding them. You simply revealed something that needed to be seen. Slowly, Maren placed her hand on his arm. Together they crossed the ballroom. The same crowd that had watched her humiliation now stepped aside. Maren could feel Lucien's jacket around her shoulders and his steady presence beside her. But what overwhelmed her most was something she had rarely been given. Dignity without having to beg for it. Across the room, Elias watched them go and understood that something irreversible had happened. Lucien had spent years protecting his empire from enemies, betrayal, and weakness. Tonight, before the most powerful people in Chicago, he had revealed the one thing he could no longer pretend was merely professional. Someone had hurt Maren Holloway, and Lucien Devereaux had felt it personally. By 8 the next morning, everyone at Devereaux Holdings knew what had happened at the charity gala. Videos of Lucien placing his jacket around Maren's shoulders had circulated among executives before sunrise. But it was his declaration that people repeated in hushed voices. Anyone who humiliates the woman responsible for keeping this company standing is humiliating me. Maren arrived at work expecting embarrassment. Instead, hallways grew quiet as she passed. Some employees offered awkward smiles. Others lowered their eyes, especially those who had laughed at the edited photographs days earlier. Maren greeted them exactly as she always had. She wanted no revenge. She wanted dignity, and there was a difference. Inside his office, Lucien stood before the windows when Elias entered. 3 board members have called. I know. They're concerned last night, looked emotional. Lucien turned slowly. Months earlier, that accusation would have angered him. Now it sounded strangely hollow. Perhaps emotion isn't the problem, he said. Perhaps refusing to feel anything is. That afternoon, Lucien summoned every senior executive to the conference room. Maren entered with her notebook, assuming she would take minutes. Lucien stopped her before she sat down. You won't need that. When the doors closed, he remained standing. 5 years ago, I created a policy prohibiting women from serving as my executive secretary. No one moved. I called it risk management. I told myself experience had proven the danger. His gaze traveled across the table before settling on Maren. That wasn't wisdom. A pause. It was fear. Maren stared at him. Lucien Devereaux did not admit weakness. Yet there he stood, dismantling his own certainty before the people who had spent years obeying it. Several individuals betrayed my trust, and I used their choices to judge people who had done nothing wrong. That was my failure. He looked directly at Maren. You never demanded that I change. You never lectured me about fairness. You came to work every morning and gave me another reason to question what I believed. His voice softened. People will say you changed my rule. He shook his head. You didn't change my rule, Maren. You changed the man who wrote it. Silence filled the room. Then Lucien announced that the policy was permanently revoked. Hiring and promotion would be based on ability and character, and mandatory leadership training on workplace dignity and appearance-based discrimination would begin immediately. When the meeting ended, Maren gathered her notebook and headed toward the door. Maren. She turned. Lucien hesitated over two words that seemed harder for him than any threat he had ever delivered. Thank you. Her smile reached her eyes. It has been an honor. Lucien watched her leave, unaware of the irony waiting only months ahead. He had finally changed enough to deserve her trust. Soon, Maren would begin wondering whether that meant he no longer needed her. 4 months after the charity gala, Devereaux Holdings no longer felt like the company Maren Holloway had first entered. The marble floors, glass offices, and Chicago skyline were unchanged, but the people moving through them were different. Managers who once dismissed junior employees now listened before making decisions. Recruitment teams stopped requesting applicant photographs during early screening. Leadership workshops on workplace dignity became mandatory, and jokes about someone's weight, age, gender, or appearance were no longer dismissed as harmless office humor. The company was not perfect, but it was better, and almost everyone understood whose quiet example had started the change. Maren did not. She still arrived 20 minutes early, checked Lucien's calendar, reviewed security clearances, corrected travel arrangements, and placed coffee beside his laptop before his first meeting. She still reminded him to eat lunch. He still pretended the reminder was unnecessary. Their relationship had settled into something neither of them named, built from ordinary mornings and the kind of trust Lucien once believed impossible. Then, one Monday, Human Resources requested a confidential meeting with Maren. 30 minutes later, she returned carrying a sealed envelope. Lucien noticed it from behind the glass wall of his office. He also noticed she avoided looking toward him. That evening, after the executive floor emptied, Maren remained at her desk, longer than usual. The promotion HR had offered her should have felt like everything she had worked toward. Chief of Staff, a substantial salary increase, authority across the executive office, and a seat beside senior leadership. Instead, Maren kept hearing one sentence from the meeting. You helped change this company. Perhaps that was exactly why she should leave. The systems now worked without her constantly repairing them. Executives communicated. Lucien trusted his people again. Maybe her purpose had never been to stay. Maybe it had only been to help them become strong enough that she could go. She opened a blank document and began typing. Her resignation was brief, professional, grateful, exactly as Lucien would expect from her. The following evening, she knocked softly on his office door. Come in. Lucien looked up and immediately sensed something wrong. Maren placed tomorrow's briefing on his desk, then remained standing. There's something else. She reached into her bag and laid an envelope beside his hand. I wanted to thank you for everything. His eyes moved from her face to the envelope. What is this? Maren forced a small smile. My resignation. The room seemed to lose its air. Lucien stared at her before opening the letter. Explain. Char offered me chief of staff. His confusion deepened. You earned it. I declined. For perhaps the first time since she had known him, Lucien looked genuinely unprepared. Maren glanced toward the city beyond his windows. The company is different now. The systems work. People trust each other. You trust people. She tried to smile. You don't need someone constantly reminding you to eat lunch anymore. That is debatable. She almost laughed, but sadness returned too quickly. You deserve someone stronger to take it from here. Lucien looked down at the resignation letter. Months earlier, he had feared allowing Maren into his office. Now she was standing before him, asking permission to disappear from it. And suddenly, every lesson she had taught him about trust carried a terrifying consequence. Trusting someone also meant giving them the freedom to leave. Lucien read the resignation letter twice, as though the words might rearrange themselves into something he could accept. They did not. Maren Holloway was thanking Devereaux Holdings for the opportunity, declining the chief of staff position, and leaving the company she had quietly transformed. Everything about the letter was professional. Everything about it felt unbearable. You think I don't need you anymore? He asked. Maren folded her hands in front of her. trying to keep them steady. I think you've become the leader this company needs. The office runs differently now. People communicate. You trust your executives. You don't need me standing between you and every possible problem. Lucien pushed back from his desk and stood. Months ago, people had entered this room asking him for money, promotions, access, protection, influence. Maren was the first person who had earned all of those things and then chosen to walk away. And you believe someone stronger should become chief of staff? Yes. Stronger than the woman who reconstructed a $500 million acquisition from memory? Maren looked away. That was my job. It wasn't. Lucien stepped around the desk. Was refusing a supplier's gift your job? Was changing how this company treats people your job? Was teaching a man who trusted no one that integrity could exist without surveillance your job? Lucien. It was the first time his name escaped her without the protective distance of Mr. Devereaux. Both of them heard it. Neither corrected it. He stopped several feet from her. You said the systems work now. You're right. Someone else can manage the calendar. Someone else can confirm flights, prepare board materials, organize meetings, and remind me about appointments. A faint sadness touched his expression. They might even remember my lunch. Maren tried to smile. Eventually, that's the problem. His voice softened. I can replace the secretary, Maren. I can't replace you. Her breath caught. Lucien had negotiated with criminals, billionaires, politicians, and men who considered fear a currency. None of them had ever made him feel as exposed as the woman standing before him now. Before you came here, I believed strength meant never needing anyone. I believed trust was a weakness people eventually punished. Then you walked into my office after I had already decided who you were before you sat down. Maren's eyes began to shine. You proved me wrong without trying to defeat me. You just kept showing up. He moved closer. You remembered what I forgot. You noticed what everyone ignored. You protected things you could have exploited. And when people were cruel to you, you still chose dignity when cruelty would have been easier. Maren blinked back tears. I never wanted anything from you. I know. Lucien gave a quiet, almost broken laugh. That may be why you became everything I didn't know I needed. The city lights stretched beyond the windows, but neither looked away now. I stopped needing an executive secretary months ago, he continued. What I needed was the person who made this office feel peaceful instead of empty. The person whose coffee cup beside that desk tells me the day has started. The woman who argues with me about dentists and sandwiches because apparently no one else in Chicago is brave enough. Maren laughed through the tear that escaped down her cheek. Lucien's expression softened at the sound. Then all humor disappeared, leaving only truth. What I cannot imagine is coming here tomorrow and finding your chair empty. Maren lowered her eyes. I don't want to complicate your life. You didn't complicate it. He waited until she looked at him again. You made it meaningful. Silence filled the office. Lucien took one final step toward her, close enough now that power, titles, and rules seemed irrelevant. Maren Holloway, I'm not asking you to stay because you are the best secretary I have ever had. I'm asking because somewhere between impossible schedules, forgotten lunches, quiet mornings, and every moment you never asked me to notice you, I fell in love with you. Maren covered her mouth as another tear fell. For months, she had believed Lucien valued what she could do. She had never allowed herself to imagine he might value who she was. You really would forget lunch without me, she whispered. Lucien laughed, genuinely and without restraint. Absolutely. Maren slowly reached for his hand. Then I have one condition. His fingers closed around hers. Name it. I accept chief of staff. But you stop skipping lunch. Lucien smiled. Done. Outside, Chicago continued moving beneath them. Inside, the man who once refused to hire her stood holding the hand of the woman he could no longer imagine losing. The rule had been easy to tear apart. The walls around his heart had taken longer. Maren had broken those, without ever trying. 1 year later, Devereaux Holdings looked almost exactly the same from the Chicago streets below. But inside, the company Lucien and Maren had changed together was almost unrecognizable. Maren now served as chief of staff, leading the executive office with the same quiet competence that had once made a skeptical mafia boss tear his own rule in half. Devereaux Holdings had also launched a leadership scholarship for women, pursuing careers in executive management, offering mentorship, professional training, and financial support to people who had spent years believing opportunities belonged to someone else. At the inaugural awards ceremony, young women filled the auditorium beside executives, community leaders, and journalists. Many knew Maren's story. Some had been underestimated because of their appearance. Others had simply never seen someone like themselves standing close to power without changing who she was to belong there. When the ceremony ended, a reporter raised his hand. "Mr. Devereaux, after all the acquisitions and expansions you've led, what was the most important business decision of your career?" Lucien could have named deals worth billions. Instead, he turned toward Maren. She recognized the expression immediately and shook her head with an embarrassed smile. Lucien smiled back. "The most important decision I ever made was hiring the one person everyone told me to reject." Applause swept through the auditorium. Maren reached for his hand, and Lucien held it without hesitation. A year earlier, he would have considered that openness a weakness. Now he understood what Maren had taught him through every ordinary act of integrity. Power could force obedience, but only character could earn trust. Their story had begun with a man convinced that changing his mind meant losing control, and a woman accustomed to being judged before anyone discovered her worth. It ended with both understanding something greater. The strongest leader is not the one who never breaks his own rules. It is the one courageous enough to recognize when the right person has revealed why those rules were wrong. And the woman Lucien Devereaux once refused to hire became the woman who changed everything.